Hi guys, and welcome back to Is It Worth It Reviews. Today we have a small portable DAC from Hiby called FC6, and it's an R2R DAC with some interesting features. Okay, so the story is pretty simple here. This is a portable DAC. It has one USB-C input, it has one 3.5mm output that you can use as a line level output, so you can connect this to your room stereo setup, or you can connect your headphones, and there is a small headphone amplifier inside that will drive your headphones directly. Controls are really simple, with volume buttons on the side and one button in front that circles through menus. There's a small, I think it's OLED display here. It has colors, it looks nice. Everything that you need to do is big and easily readable. So I'll quickly go through a few things that you probably need to know about this model. It's an R2R DAC, and it uses a network of resistors to convert digital to analog signal instead of some sort of chip coming from Sabre or AKM, etc. And it also has some other words that have nice ring to them, like FPGA circuit that handles the signal. So wow, it's FPGA plus R2R, and then it has operational amplifiers. Wait, what? That's not really that sexy. Operational amp. Everything has op amps. Okay, what else? Oh, Darwin architecture. That sounds sexy for sure. To be perfectly honest here, I have no idea what Darwin architecture is. It sounds like a marketing mumbo jumbo. I did a quick Google search, and it seems that they're using it in their more expensive depths. And that's something that they're trickling down now in this smaller and more affordable DAC. But I didn't want to dive too much into it because, you know, every manufacturer has some sort of technology that they claim is the next big thing. It's a breakthrough that will bring your music to life. But in the end, it's not on me to tout their technologies, it's on me to test it in real life and compare it with other products that might also have some impressive technologies on their own. So being stuck to these marketing terms is something that I was so in when I was like 18 years old, but nowadays I simply know better. Aside from that, few other things that are useful to know is that this DAC is not all that powerful. I think it measures around 100 milliwatts or something like that. I'll put that on the screen just to be sure. And then you have a few things that you can play with. First one is that you can choose between several digital filters. You can try that for yourself. I circled through them. They bring subtle differences. I ended up preferring the default factory chosen one. The second one is choosing NOS or OS, that's non-oversampling or oversampling mode, and the factory default is OS. And that sounds good, but NOS, in my mind and to my ears, sounds a little bit better, fuller, tonally richer, with more inner tone texture, so I left it at NOS because I preferred it. In that mode, the sound of this DAC reminds me on Chord Mojo 2, in a good way. OS is a little bit cleaner, it's maybe a bit more extended in highs, but it sounds less natural and less rich. So once again, try for yourself, but personally I preferred NOS. And the last option is HDR. And if you're thinking, wait, that's for videos and TVs, not for DACs. Yeah, even on their web page, there's like HDR function, and then there's an image that shows you that this function works similar to making your sound more like HDR, and there's like an image of the picture, actual picture with brighter colors and everything. And I tried this function with several songs, and turning it on and off, I have to say I heard no difference. And you know, I am a hi-fi reviewer, and we are often blamed that we hear differences even when there are none, that we are imagining it, that we are biased. But I heard no difference turning HDR on or off. Wow, man, you're even a lousy hi-fi reviewer. You cannot imagine a difference, at least a small one. Tell your audience something. But I'm sorry to say I hear no difference. Try for yourself. Let me know down in the comments if you heard anything. But know this, whatever it is, it cannot truly bring high dynamic range to your music. That's something that comes from the source material. If the mix has high dynamic range, your song will have high dynamic range. If the mix is dynamically compressed, meaning low dynamic range, the only way to make you believe that you have a higher dynamic range is to do some sort of DSP processing and trick you into thinking it. But as I said, I didn't even notice any sort of trickery happening here, so yeah. And all of these features out of the way, that leaves us with how does it actually sound. So what I did first is I connected my Moondrop Blessing 3 in-ears, really good in-ears by the way, and I started listening. I listened to several songs and I noticed that the tonality is very neutral. It does not lean heavily on the bass side or the highs. It's not warm really, but it's not sharp and peaking in highs or anything like that. One thing to notice here though is that this DAC sounds clean and precise and tidy and well controlled. If you're looking for some sort of warmth or added bass line, you'll not find that here. And listening to this DAC in isolation, I couldn't really notice anything specifically great or bad about it. It just sounded good. But then this song came along and I listened and I was like, am I imagining this, or is the soundstage really spacious and I mean wide and deep, and there is like a lot of empty room in between instruments, and then tone decay is clean, like those spatial cues, echoes. There's a really good sense of empty space around me and around the instruments. And I was like, yeah, this song really sounds good through this DAC. And it feels very spacious, even with in-ears, which are not champions of spaciousness, of course. So I was thinking, am I having a good music day? You know, that day when everything sounds just fine to you. Or maybe this recording is absolutely great, but I haven't listened to it on my earphones for some time and I forgot that. So to find out what's happening, I had to do several comparisons. And I first started with the Moondrop Moonriver 2 Ti that I recently reviewed. It's more affordable than Hiby FC6, but when I reviewed it, I was quite impressed exactly with how spacious and clean it sounded. And when I compared them directly, I first started comparing single-ended output of Moonriver 2 Ti with the single-ended output on FC6, because that's the only one FC6 has. And I'll be straight here. FC6 simply sounded better. And it sounded better across the board, starting with better detail retrieval. Inner tone texture especially was just richer. You could hear more things happening, like upper harmonics of a tone, and those tiny detailing that create the sensation of tone texture, something that's important if we listen to the vocals or acoustic instruments. Any tone that is not perfectly artificially digitally clean but has lots of small vibrations and variations happening, FC6 is conveying that with greater clarity and it just sounds more natural. So it was more detailed and cleaner all around, but also more spacious. The soundstage was simply bigger and pinpointing was better and more precise. So single-ended output of Moonriver 2 Ti was simply not a match to the FC6. And then I moved to balanced output. And balanced output on the Moonriver 2 Ti sounds more spacious. It's better separated, it's layered better, and it has better pinpointing and more empty space around instruments. And then it came closer to FC6, but it was still not completely equal. There was still a small gap, and FC6 still sounded a little bit more spacious and more precise overall. But probably even easier to notice than that was that, once again, that inner tone texture. FC6 here, especially in the NOS mode, sounds more tonally rich. The tone timbre is richer, and that inner tone texture is richer than with Moonriver 2 Ti. Is that worth the asking price difference? Well, I don't know. If you can use balanced output on Moonriver 2 Ti, the difference is noticeable, but it's not that big. But if you can only use single-ended outputs, then the difference is definitely quite noticeable in my opinion, and in that case I would definitely go for FC6. Of course, if my budget can allow it, because it's not an insignificant price difference between these two. Now, I know that some of you would ask me, what about Cayin RU6, because it's also a small portable R2R DAC. Well, I do not have that one with me anymore, but I can, with quite a bit of confidence, I can say that that one sounds warmer, more full-bodied, especially in the mid-bass, and denser. But it's not as revealing, it's not as clean sounding as FC6, and it's not as spacious sounding with the same kind of layering and pinpointing everything precisely, and that empty space that echoes with tone decays on FC6 is a little bit hazier, denser, and just more melted together on RU6. RU6 was all about its tone timbre and that fullness and richness, but it was never about clarity and dark, deep background. It melted everything together, and it was one of rare DACs where if you don't listen to anything, you can actually hear a slight background noise happening at all times, which is something that I don't notice with FC6. So my opinion on these two DACs is that FC6 is a better, more accomplished DAC. It's also R2R, it has that rich inner tone details, it has rich mid-range, but it's cleaner, clearer, and more precise than RU6. So lastly, I took much pricier Chord Mojo 2 just to check how they compare and, you know, to put things into perspective. And if you remember, I told you that in NOS mode, FC6 actually reminds me on the tonality and sound of Chord Mojo 2. And it does. They both have mostly neutral sound to them, and Chord Mojo 2 is slightly warmer in the bass line and mid-bass and has fuller bass line in general, whereas FC6 is touch leaner sounding. But through the mid-range and highs, they share that very revealing nature with great clarity, quick transients, great inner tone detailing, but they're not sharp or over-etched or artificially clean sounding. They never sound like that. There's just some kind of natural sound to both of these. But as I said, the bass line on Mojo 2 is definitely fuller, gruntier, and more authoritative. And you might not notice that much if you compare them using very sensitive in-ears. For example, like I said, I used Moondrop Blessing 3 for the big part of my testings. And using these highly sensitive in-ears, I thought that these two DACs sound so much alike. And I was like, wow, Mojo 2 might be in a problem here because FC6 is so close. It's just like, I'm not sure that it pays to go to Mojo 2. But that impression changes a little bit when you go to bigger and more demanding headphones. And for example, when I use the planners, VRM1s, and these are also not insensitive. On the contrary, these are quite sensitive headphones for their size, but they are more demanding than in-ears, and they just have more full range sound to them. And using them, I noticed that Mojo 2 definitely has greater control, greater punch and drive, and it can also go higher with volume level. It keeps its firm grip, kick and composure for longer. At loud volume levels, FC6 here will start to sound a little bit stressed and compressed, like the bass line is starting to sound a little bit loose and not as grippy and as quick and as explosive, but that's kind of expected for a smaller, more portable, less powerful DAC. Once again, I'm just saying this to put it into context. If you're using very sensitive in-ears, then Hiby FC6 will offer the huge chunk of performance of Chord Mojo 2, but if you go to more demanding, more power-hungry headphones, then Mojo 2 will separate itself a little bit more. Then, my last comparison that I did was with a small desktop DAC. If you're wondering how does this one fares in a typical stereo system, that's something that you often ask when I review portable DACs, and I often omit that part. This time I compared it to SMSL SU-1, which is like more than 3 times more affordable, but it's not portable, it doesn't have a headphone output, it's just a simple DAC with RCA outputs, line level outputs, and if that's all you need, then SU-1 does sound clearer and cleaner and simply a little bit more explosive and energetic. FC6 does not embarrass itself, it's a really good sounding DAC, but it is just slightly less dynamic, slightly less resolving than SU-1 here. So if a stationary DAC is what you need, then this is a better solution. But if you do need a portable DAC first, then FC6 is great. And it also handles that stationary line output DAC tasks pretty well. And this leads me to the conclusion. Hiby FC6 is a great sounding DAC. It's a very interesting R2R portable DAC, but in some ways it's not that inspiring, because it clearly sounds better than a more affordable product such as Moonriver 2 Ti, but it doesn't sound as good as a pricier product such as Mojo 2, which makes it good for its price. And there's nothing wrong with that, absolutely. It's actually a great buy. It sounds better than many DACs of a similar price that I reviewed like last year, 2 years ago. It's a pinnacle of portable DACs at its price point right now. But it's just not a giant killer. It doesn't sound better, or at least as good as a DAC that's twice the price. So I cannot call it giant killer and make some insanely clickbaity thumbnail. Or maybe I can. Maybe I can. But what FC6 is a really good portable DAC. And if you're already running one of the latest and greatest models, such as Mojo 2 or Moonriver 2 Ti, this one doesn't bring any sort of new and exciting value to the market. It just fits right into that really good price to performance ratio. But if you would to compare it to something a little bit older, such as Dragonfly Cobalt for example, FC6 would smoke it in every way that a DAC can smoke another DAC. And with that, it's time to end this video. See you next time, guys. Bye.